Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our current session is about language accommodation. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand the term and you would know some of its examples. Well, my dear students, generally speaking, accommodation is the process by which participants in a conversation adjust their accent, diction, or other aspects of their language depending upon the audience or the participants in the conversation. However, there is an important question. What brings a speaker to choose variety X of a language A rather than variety Y of, or even language A rather than language B? So how, a speaker accommodates the listener or the participants in the conversation or the interlocutors in the conversation by making different varieties of language as choices. There can be various answers that can be suggested based on the solidarity relationships, based on the idea of accommodating the listener so that the listener could understand what the speaker is saying, depending upon the topic of the choice on which the conversation is going on, perceived social and cultural distance between the speaker and the listener, and various other factors. In other words, what we can say is, it is basically the motivation of the speaker that is important. It is the speaker who is triggered to choose a certain language or a variety of a language, to use in a particular situation. Now, this motivation can be conscious and this can be unconscious as well. Sometimes the speakers are aware of it, sometimes they are not, and they switch or they mix. In fact, speakers try to accommodate the expectations of the other people who are, in the conversation, who are involved in the conversation with them. And this can be a deliberate choice to help them ease out, in that process. Accommodation is one way of explaining how individuals, but it is another way of explaining how groups may be seen to relate to each other. The processes of accommodation, my dear students, take place in two ways: convergence and divergence. Now, what is convergence? It can be shift in behavior to become more like the other. So, in a conversation, for example, where two persons, person A and B are involved, person A speaks X language, person B speaks Y language. But, in order to be like person B, there is a possibility that person A would shift the language and thus would accommodate speaker B. As far as divergence is concerned, it is completely opposite to that. It is the desire to be judged less favorably than, not to be associated with the other group or with the other person. In that case, the shift in behavior is to be away from that. So if the person A does not want to be related to person B, or if group A does not want to be related to group B, in conversations, what would they do? Group A or person A would stay away from the language choices or the language varieties or language behavior chosen by person B or group B. So, simple examples in life are of putting on airs and graces in order to deliberately disassociate yourself, from the other person, where you sound to be rude and try to be, disassociated with a particular person or a group. There are certain cost-benefit aspects of this accommodation of, the interlocutors. We see convergence when a speaker tries to adopt the accent of a listener, and that used within another social group or even extreme cases gives a particular accent or dialect or a language to a particular group. This effect of convergence can be so much that it can change the language or the pronunciation, for example, of a group who speaks a particular language. When we look at all this process, not on the individual level, we look at it as a collective level, as a group phenomenon, the process of language accommodation may kill a minority language, because if they would accommodate for the language of the stronger group, their own language would be deserted, it would be killed. Divergence is behind exaggerating differences. Examples are recreolizations. For example, Paraguayans using Guarani rather than Spanish when they are abroad. So, you try to differentiate yourself from the other, and in that process, you keep your language separate and different. Giles and Copland explain, that speech accommodation as a multiply organized and contextually complex set of alternatives regularly available to communicators when it comes to face-to-face talk. This is a constant process. This is what they say. This is not a one-time process. Throughout the process of convergence or divergence keeps on happening. They believe it can function to index and achieve solidarity with some person or some group, or disassociation with the other person or the other group. Lepage 1997 also has pointed certain things with reference to this and has extended the definition to add that, certain creations of the identities of a person. The speaker creates his or her identity through this process of accommodation, through making choices or of converging or of diverging from language. To him, we do not necessarily adapt to the style of the interlocutor, but rather sometimes to the image we have of ourselves in relation to the other. According to him, it is not only that out of, our desire to accommodate the listener that we do that. Sometimes the way we want to present ourselves, the kind of identity that we want to create ourselves, we do that. Johnson and Weiner, 1998, has used accommodation theory to explain differences in language choice. He differentiates choice between some old order Amish and old order Mennonite communities in the northern East United States and Ontario and other New Order communities on the basis of this language accommodation theory. And the differences that he has pointed out are: Old Order communities adhere strictly to the use of different varieties of German, Low Pennsylvania German, High Pennsylvania German, and Bible German, and English according to the circumstances. So when they would shift from one situation to the other, depending upon that, they would accommodate and they would change the language variety. They use the varieties of German exclusively within the communities and use English as a contact language when they communicate with people from the outside world. Within the New Order, according to him, communities such as the Beachy Amish and Honning Mennonites, there has been a complete shift to English, and they have, according to him, they have accommodated English so much that they do not use their local language varieties. So, overall, the process of language accommodation is a process of, how speakers of different languages, in social backdrops and settings, when they communicate, they accommodate the presence of the others and they make changes in their languages.